It was a bright Tuesday morning when the lobby of GTS Corporation buzzed with its usual energy. The polished floors shined under the overhead lights, and the scent of fresh coffee drifted through the air. The receptionist, Laura, sat at her desk, typing away on her computer. She had a system for everything. The visitors, the calls, the schedules. It was all part of the routine she had perfected over the years. Today, however, something was different. The door swung open with a soft chime, signaling the arrival of a new guest. Laura didn't look up immediately. She was used to the steady flow of visitors, from clients to salespeople, to job applicants. She quickly glanced at the clock. 10 minutes until her break. She was ready for a quiet moment, maybe a cup of tea. But the man who walked in made her pause. He didn't look like the usual type. He was dressed simply, dark jeans, a clean t-shirt, and a jacket that looked like it had seen better days. His face was calm, his eyes sharp, but it was his presence that stood out. He moved confidently, almost like he owned the place, though he didn't seem to fit in with the high-powered business suits that often filled the lobby. Laura raised her eyebrows. Just another lost visitor, she thought, dismissing him quickly. "Can I help you?" she asked without looking up, her fingers still tapping on the keyboard. The man smiled politely. "I'm here to see Mr. Gregson. I have an appointment." Laura glanced at him now, her eyes scanning his attire. His clothes weren't expensive, not the way the big executives dressed when they came in. Still, there was something about him that seemed oddly out of place. She glanced back at her computer. "Mr. Gregson is in a meeting right now. You'll have to wait." She gestured lazily to the row of chairs in the waiting area, as if to say, "Sit over there. Don't bother me." The man didn't seem to mind. He simply nodded and walked over to the chairs. He settled into one near the window, leaning back and folding his arms. Laura returned to her work, barely glancing up. Another person who thinks they can just walk in and demand attention, she thought, rolling her eyes. As time passed, more people came and went, but the man remained seated, his calm demeanor not changing. Occasionally, he would check his watch, but there was no rush in him. It was as though he had all the time in the world. Laura noticed his calmness, but quickly dismissed it as nothing more than a lack of awareness. Probably just a delivery guy or someone who doesn't understand how things work around here, she thought. A few minutes later, the phone rang, and Laura was momentarily distracted. She picked it up without thinking. "GTS Corporation. How can I help you?" she said, her voice professional, though her mind still lingered on the strange visitor in the lobby. A few short words were exchanged, and then a soft buzz on her desk made her look up. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a new email notification. It was from Mr. Gregson's assistant, Mr. Johnson. The new owner will be arriving shortly. He is scheduled for a meeting with Mr. Gregson. Laura's mind froze for a second. Mr. Johnson, new owner? Her confusion was momentary, and she quickly returned to her work. There was no time to think about it. Still, the words stuck with her. The man in the lobby didn't look like an owner of a major corporation. As she hung up the phone and started typing again, she saw the man stand up from his seat. He wasn't rushing, but there was a new energy in his movements. He walked toward her desk. She raised an eyebrow and glanced at him. "Yes?" she asked, her tone a little more curt now. The man stopped a few feet away from her. "I believe I'm ready to meet Mr. Gregson now," he said, his voice calm and steady. Laura blinked and looked at the clock. Strange, she thought. His appointment was never confirmed. But as she glanced over at him again, she noticed something that hadn't caught her attention before, the business card he was holding out to her. She took it, her eyes quickly scanning the name. James Johnson, CEO, GTS Corporation. Her heart skipped a beat. She stared at the card, then back up at the man. His face was now familiar to her, though she hadn't recognized him when he first entered. The realization hit her hard. This was the new owner. But it didn't make sense. He didn't look like the kind of person who belonged in a luxury corporate building. He didn't fit the image of the typical CEO. Still, there he was, standing in front of her. And she had just been rude. She had assumed he was nobody. "Mr. Gregson will be in shortly," she said, her voice faltering a little. She felt a heat rising in her cheeks. "Please, have a seat." The man didn't acknowledge the apology. Instead, he smiled once more, that calm smile. He didn't seem angry, but there was something about his eyes that made Laura feel small in comparison. As he sat back down, she noticed the way the light hit his face, his expression unreadable, but his presence undeniable. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this small misjudgment, was going to be the start of something that would change everything. And the man who had entered the lobby so casually, so unassumingly, was about to shake the very foundation of the company she worked for. But for now, all she could do was watch as he settled back into his seat, waiting. Just another visitor, she thought. Just another man in the lobby. She had no idea how wrong she was. Minutes passed in the lobby, and Laura's focus shifted back to her work. The man, now seated and waiting, remained silent, his calm presence continuing to unsettle her. She had assumed he was just another visitor, someone who had gotten lost in the massive corporate building. But the name on the business card he had handed her changed everything. James Johnson, the new owner. It felt impossible. She had never heard of him. Could he really be the CEO? She couldn't shake the feeling that she had made a huge mistake, but there was no time to dwell on it. The phone buzzed again, pulling her back into her duties. She quickly answered, her voice tight with the unease that had begun to settle in. "Yes, this is Laura," she said, her tone polite but distracted. "Laura, it's Gregson. I need you to make sure Mr. Johnson is ready for our meeting in 10 minutes, said the voice on the other end of the line. "And tell him I'll be right down." Gregson's voice was smooth, businesslike, as usual. But something about it made Laura's heart skip a beat. The way he said Mr. Johnson, as if he knew exactly who he was talking about, as if it was perfectly normal for a man who dressed in jeans and a jacket to be the new owner of the company. She blinked, her mind racing. "Mr. Gregson doesn't even know who he is, does he?" "Understood," Laura replied, though she felt a growing unease. "I have to tell Mr. Gregson what happened with this man. He's not who I thought he was. But I don't even know how to explain it." Before she could process further, her eyes flicked back to the lobby. The man, Mr. Johnson, was still sitting calmly, his gaze distant. He seemed completely unfazed by the chaos that was brewing inside her. The silence between them felt heavy, as though something monumental was about to unfold. Laura quickly hung up the phone and stood up. Her heart thudded in her chest as she approached the man. She had to make sure he was who he claimed to be. She had to double-check everything. "Mr. Johnson," she began, her voice tentative but respectful. "I'm afraid I made an error earlier. There seems to be some confusion on my end. Are you really the new owner of the company?" The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked up at her, his face unreadable. For a moment, Laura thought he might be offended. She could feel her palms sweating, and the heat in her cheeks intensified. Then he smiled. It wasn't a mocking smile, not at all. It was calm, knowing, as if he had expected this very reaction. "Yes," he said quietly, his voice steady. "I'm James Johnson. I own GTS Corporation now." Laura froze. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. This man was the CEO, the very same man she had dismissed as just another visitor. The thought made her stomach turn with embarrassment. I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I didn't realize." He nodded slowly, his expression softening, though there was something about him that still held an air of authority, of power. "It's all right. I don't expect everyone to know who I am just yet." His voice was calm, but the words carried weight. He's not angry, Laura thought, but I can feel the shift in the air. There's something about him that demands respect. "I'll make sure Mr. Gregson is informed immediately," she said, her voice more confident now that the shock had worn off. She quickly stepped back and started typing a message to Gregson, but her mind was elsewhere. How could I have been so wrong? As she typed, the lobby began to feel more and more like a stage, the man seated across from her becoming the central figure in a scene that she had no script for. She felt as though she was watching something unfold, something big, and she wasn't sure if she would be part of the story or left standing in the wings, waiting for the inevitable fallout. Minutes later, the elevator doors opened and Gregson stepped out, his usually confident stride a little more hurried than usual. He caught sight of Mr. Johnson immediately, and his face lit up with recognition. He extended his hand in greeting. "Mr. Johnson, I didn't expect you so soon." "Thank you for coming," Gregson said warmly. James Johnson stood up and shook his hand. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Gregson. I'm glad to be here." Laura couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw the exchange, the handshake, the brief but meaningful conversation. She couldn't help but notice the way Mr. Gregson had suddenly become much more respectful and polite, as though the air had shifted completely around him. And just like that, the man who had been dismissed and ignored, who had been treated like an outsider, someone not worthy of attention, was now the most important person in the room. The transformation was subtle, but Laura saw it. The change in Gregson's tone, the way he had bowed his head slightly in greeting, the way the entire lobby had gone silent for a moment, as if everyone was suddenly aware that this man was more than he appeared to be. But there was no time to analyze it. The business at hand was pressing. Gregson had already motioned for Mr. Johnson to follow him into his office, and Laura was left standing in the lobby, still trying to make sense of the events. Her hands trembled slightly as she returned to her desk. "I can't believe I treated him like that," she thought. "I thought he was just another regular visitor, but this wasn't just a regular man. This was the new owner of GTS Corporation, and in the blink of an eye, everything had changed." The following hours passed in a blur. Laura couldn't shake the image of Mr. Johnson's calm demeanor and the sudden transformation in the atmosphere of the office. It was as though the entire building had changed. What had started as an ordinary day, filled with mundane office tasks and predictable routines, now felt like the calm before a storm. In the back of her mind, Laura was still wrestling with the tension between her own professional behavior and the mistake she had made. How could she have been so dismissive? It was not just any man she had treated with indifference. It was the very person who now owned the company she worked for. Minutes later, Gregson returned from his meeting with Mr. Johnson. His posture was different now. He stood taller, his voice calmer. He walked into the lobby and stopped at Laura's desk. "Laura," he said, his voice much less businesslike than before, "could you please come to the boardroom? There's something we need to discuss." His words were polite, but there was a tone of authority that made Laura's heart race. She nodded quickly, pushing aside her doubts and quickly following him down the hallway to the large, glass-walled boardroom. The nerves in her stomach churned. Something big was about to happen, and she could feel it in her bones. When they entered the boardroom, she saw Mr. Johnson seated at the head of the long wooden table, his fingers resting on the surface in front of him. The expression on his face was unreadable, calm, sure, and perhaps even a little amused. But there was something else in his gaze that kept Laura on edge. His calmness seemed almost too deliberate. Gregson motioned for Laura to sit at the far end of the table before taking the seat beside Mr. Johnson. Laura couldn't help but feel like she was on the outside of something that was unfolding far beyond her understanding. "I hope you don't mind, Laura," Gregson began, "but we need to make some things clear. Mr. Johnson is not here for a formal introduction. He's already made his decision regarding the future of the company." Her throat tightened as she tried to comprehend his words. What decision? What could he possibly mean? Mr. Johnson's voice broke through the silence. "I've been observing things for a while now. I've seen the work that's being done and the people who've been involved. It's clear that there's room for improvement, but there's also great potential here." Laura swallowed hard. She didn't know if Mr. Johnson was speaking in generalities or if this was some sort of corporate speech. She glanced quickly at Gregson, who seemed to nod along with Mr. Johnson's words, clearly hanging on every syllable. "The first change," Mr. Johnson continued, "is the way we treat people here. Respect, professionalism, and fairness. That's the new standard. Laura, I trust you've learned it by now." Her heart skipped a beat as she realized he was referencing her earlier mistake. She felt a flush of heat creep up her neck, but she held her tongue. She had made the mistake. There was no denying it. "And Gregson," Mr. Johnson said, turning to the CEO, "I need you to ensure that everyone in this building understands that this company will no longer tolerate a culture of disrespect. It starts with leadership." Gregson nodded quickly, his face now serious. "Of course. I understand completely." Laura watched the exchange unfold, her mind racing to process everything. Is he really changing the entire company's culture already? Is this happening because of me? It was becoming clearer to her now. Mr. Johnson wasn't just a figurehead or a businessman. He was a man of action, someone who believed in making immediate changes and doing so with authority. Her thoughts were interrupted when Mr. Johnson's gaze turned back to her. His eyes were steady, not harsh, but still carrying a weight that was hard to ignore. "I won't tolerate mediocrity, Laura," he said. "But I also don't believe in punishing people for a mistake made out of ignorance. You'll have the chance to prove yourself. I expect better from everyone here. Do you understand?" The weight of his words sank in, and for the first time in a long time, Laura felt a wave of humility wash over her. She nodded quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Mr. Johnson, I understand." The next few moments were filled with tense silence. Gregson, who had been quite talkative before, seemed to be waiting for something, perhaps approval or further guidance from Mr. Johnson. Laura was quiet, watching the two men as they exchanged glances. Finally, Mr. Johnson spoke again. "Gregson, we're moving forward with some major changes. I want to see the full company report by the end of the week. We'll start from the top and work our way down." Gregson nodded again. "Of course, Mr. Johnson. I'll get on it immediately." Laura shifted uncomfortably in her chair. It was clear that this was the beginning of something significant, something she wasn't entirely prepared for. The sudden shift in dynamics was both unsettling and exhilarating. As the meeting began to wind down, Mr. Johnson stood and extended his hand to Laura. She hesitated for a moment, but then, without thinking, she stood and shook his hand firmly. His grip was steady, confident, and the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. "You're not the only one who needs to prove something, Laura," he said with a small smile. "But I believe you have it in you." The words hit her hard. He believes in me. After everything. She left the boardroom feeling a mixture of emotions, embarrassment, awe, and something else she couldn't quite place. She wasn't sure where this new chapter was going to take her, but one thing was clear. Things had already changed, and she would have to change with them. The next few days felt like an eternity for Laura. After the meeting with Mr. Johnson, everything had changed in the office. There was an energy that had not existed before, a sense of anticipation, as if everyone was bracing for something to happen. The usual hum of the office was now charged with a quiet tension. People whispered in corners, eyes flicked nervously to their bosses, and even the coffee machine seemed to be running a little slower than usual. It was as if the whole company was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Laura tried to focus on her work, but the memory of Mr. Johnson's words kept replaying in her mind. "You have it in you." Those words lingered, but they weren't enough to ease the growing discomfort in her chest. She knew she had made a mistake, but his offer of a second chance was both a relief and a weight. She couldn't fail again. Not now. It wasn't just about her own professional reputation. It was about something much bigger. There was a new sense of purpose in the office, something that felt like a promise. But it also felt like a test, and Laura wasn't sure if she was ready for it. Late one afternoon, as Laura worked at her desk, she saw Gregson walking toward her. He looked different now, more serious, less approachable. His usual swagger was gone, replaced with a stiff posture that seemed to reflect the pressure he was under. He had been quiet since the meeting with Mr. Johnson, his presence in the office almost ghost-like. Now, he stopped by her desk, looking hesitant, almost as if he were about to say something important. "Laura," he said, his voice low, "can I talk to you for a minute?" She nodded, unsure of what to expect. "Of course, Gregson. What's up?" He motioned for her to follow him, leading her down the hall to the small conference room. As they entered, Gregson closed the door behind them. The sudden silence in the room made Laura's heart race. She had no idea what was going on. "Mr. Johnson," Gregson started, but then stopped. He took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts. "Look, I know things are a little strange right now. Everyone's on edge with all the changes he's making." Laura didn't respond. She just nodded, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "Mr. Johnson wants to move quickly," Gregson continued, pacing now. "He wants the company to make a complete turnaround. He's already started the process of restructuring. And frankly, we all have to follow suit." Laura's eyebrows furrowed as she processed his words. "Restructuring?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Gregson stopped pacing and turned to face her. His eyes met hers, and for the first time in days, there was a flicker of something human in his expression. "Yes, things are changing fast. But Laura," he said, his tone dropping to a more serious one, "you're not the only one under pressure." Laura frowned, still unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" "There are people here who don't like the new direction," Gregson said quietly. "There are people who don't like him. Mr. Johnson. They're not happy with the changes he's making, and they don't want to see him succeed." Laura's heart began to pound in her chest. She had heard the whispers around the office, the subtle murmurs about Mr. Johnson's leadership and the direction he wanted to take the company. But she hadn't realized how far the resistance went. "You think someone here is trying to sabotage him?" she asked, her voice tinged with alarm. Gregson's face hardened, and he looked around the room as if checking for eavesdroppers. "It's not just sabotage, it's power plays. People who want to see him fail so they can take control themselves. You see, Laura, Mr. Johnson's success means a lot of people will lose their power, and they won't go down without a fight." Laura could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. This wasn't just about her mistake anymore. This wasn't just about an employee making a mistake in front of the boss. There was something bigger at play here, something that was starting to unravel the very fabric of the company she had worked for. "You're not the only one in danger, Laura," Gregson said, his voice low and intense. "There are a lot of people in this office who have made a lot of enemies. They're not going to take kindly to Mr. Johnson shaking things up. And you, my friend, might find yourself caught in the crossfire." Laura's stomach twisted. She had no idea what she had gotten herself into. She had assumed that the meeting with Mr. Johnson would be a one-time conversation, that he would offer a second chance, and that everything would go back to normal. But now, it seemed like she was standing on the edge of something much bigger, something far more dangerous. Gregson's words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the room was palpable. Laura felt trapped. She had been given a second chance, but she also knew that this company was changing in ways she couldn't control. "Thanks for the warning," she said quietly, trying to make sense of everything. "I'll be careful." Gregson's expression softened just slightly. "Just remember, Laura, this isn't a game. The stakes are real, and people don't like change." As Laura left the conference room, her mind was spinning. What had Gregson meant by the stakes are real? What kind of battle was happening beneath the surface of this company? She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, unable to see what lay ahead. But one thing was clear. She couldn't go back to the way things were. The company was changing, and she had to decide whether she would be part of the revolution or swept away by the tide. The question now was, what role would she play in this unfolding drama? Would she rise with Mr. Johnson, Or would she be caught in the crossfire of a battle that was much bigger than her? It had been weeks since the tension in the office had reached its peak. Laura had done her best to stay focused on her work, but it wasn't easy. The whispers continued, and she could sense the eyes on her, judging her every move. It seemed that every decision she made, no matter how small, was scrutinized. She couldn't shake the feeling that the company was on the brink of collapse. And then it happened. One late afternoon, as she was working late in her office, the lights flickered and the phone on her desk rang. She glanced at the clock. It was nearly 7 p.m. Who would be calling at this hour? She answered the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. Laura, a calm voice spoke on the other end. It was Mr. Johnson. Get to the boardroom. Now. Her stomach dropped. She had no idea what this was about, but she didn't dare question him. She grabbed her jacket and headed straight for the elevator. As she made her way to the boardroom, the hallway felt unnervingly quiet. It was as though the entire office was holding its breath. When she entered the boardroom, the last person she expected to see was Gregson. He was standing by the window, his arms crossed, staring out at the city. He didn't turn to face her as she entered. "Gregson," Laura asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "What's going on?" But before he could answer, the door slammed shut behind her. Mr. Johnson entered the room, his face stern. He didn't waste any time. "Laura, Gregson," he said, his voice sharp, "I'm sure you're both aware of the resistance growing within this company. The forces working against me are stronger than I anticipated." Laura's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to speak so openly. It was as if everything had led to this moment. "I've made my decision," Mr. Johnson continued. "I will not let the company be torn apart by internal strife. Tonight, we'll find out who stands with me and who doesn't." Gregson turned around then, his face hardening. "What are you saying, Mr. Johnson?" The air was thick with tension. Laura could feel the weight of the situation pressing on her chest, and she knew that the outcome of this meeting would change everything. Mr. Johnson's eyes met Laura's. "You both have a choice to make. You've seen the power struggles happening in the background. You know how deep it runs. But I won't allow this company to be controlled by people who don't have the vision to take it forward." He walked over to the table in the center of the room and slammed down a thick folder. It was filled with documents, the kind of documents that could make or break careers. Laura's eyes flicked to the folder, then back to Mr. Johnson. "You're going to have to choose," he said firmly. "Stand with me or leave. I'll give you a moment to think about it." The room fell into a suffocating silence. The tension was so thick, it felt as if the walls were closing in. Laura's mind raced. This was it. This was the moment where everything changed. Her heart hammered in her chest as she looked at Gregson, then back at Mr. Johnson. Gregson was the first to speak. He looked Laura directly in the eye, his voice low and dangerous. "You really think he's going to save this company? He's the problem, Laura. And you're making a mistake if you stand with him." But Laura could see it now. Gregson wasn't the leader. He was part of the problem. The company wasn't going to survive with people like him pulling the strings. She took a deep breath and looked at Mr. Johnson, her decision clear. "I'm with you." Gregson's eyes widened, and for a moment, it felt like the room froze. He opened his mouth to say something, but Mr. Johnson held up a hand, silencing him. "Good," Mr. Johnson said, a satisfied glint in his eye. "You've made the right choice." The door to the boardroom opened, and 2 security guards stepped inside, their presence adding an extra layer of tension to the already charged atmosphere. "Gregson," Mr. Johnson said calmly, "you're done here." Gregson's face twisted in anger, but he didn't make a move. The security guards approached him, ready to escort him out of the room. As they led him away, he shot one last, hateful glance at Laura before he disappeared through the door. Laura turned to Mr. Johnson, feeling both a sense of relief and a rush of uncertainty. The power struggle was over for now, but the battle was far from finished. The company was on the edge of something huge, and she had just made her mark. Mr. Johnson smiled at her. "You made the right choice, Laura. The future is ours to shape." And in that moment, Laura realized just how far this story had come. She had entered a world of power, greed, and change, and now she was part of the future, whether she was ready or not.